over to you, Luck. Thank you very much indeed.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. I want to invite you all to take a trip with me back in time. And I want you to travel back with me to the time that wasn't that long ago, but it might feel like a lifetime ago, March 2020. And I want you to picture that you own a supermarket chain. Imagine you're running this large supermarket chain. And in March 2020, as this mysterious coronavirus starts to look more threatening, you start to see panic buying across the country, not just in one store, but in all your stores. All of a sudden, your shelves are empty. Your customers can't get the basics. They can't find soap. They can't find toilet paper. They can't find canned goods. And people start to get worried. And you, as the owner of a supermarket, start to see pictures like this. Elderly customers in your stores, people who have been loyal customers for years, who may not know how or want to shop online. And this is a problem. How could you solve it? Now, you might think maybe you need a more sophisticated online system, or maybe you need to hire more delivery drivers. And those might work, but they are complicated. They cost money and they take time. But what about a solution that didn't cost a lot of money? It could be implemented quickly. What if you introduced an hour of shopping first thing in the morning for your elderly and vulnerable customers? And I want to ask you with a poll question, which of these supermarkets in the UK do you think was the first to offer early morning shopping for elderly and vulnerable customers? And if you're not familiar with these UK supermarkets, Iceland is your budget option, Tesco is your mid-range, and Waitrose is your high-end. Which do you think was the first one to try the early morning shopping for elderly and vulnerable customers?
Thank you, Beth. I'm just popping to support this, if I may. We're up to 64% voted, so we'll maybe give a few more seconds for everybody to jump into this. Maybe if we can hit 80% plus, which we just have. There we are. That's quite good. Thank you, listeners.
So how's it looking, David? What have they said?
Okay, what have they said? Let's have a little look. Okay, we've closed it. So we've got topless Tesco's at 45%, very closely followed by Iceland at 41%.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, I'm not surprised to hear that, because a lot of times people will think, well, maybe it was Tesco because they're the biggest. Sometimes people think it's Waitrose because they think, high end will have the answer. But those of you who said Iceland are correct. Iceland was the first one to introduce early morning shopping for vulnerable and elderly customers. But then imagine you're still running that supermarket. You have another problem. How do you keep people from buying more than they need? So if any of you were in a supermarket back in March, you might remember seeing people filling their carts with toilet paper and soap and hand sanitizer. Well, often the supermarkets will incentivize us to buy more. But a supermarket in Denmark called Rotunden decided to do something different. And instead of offering a discount for buying two, they flipped the script. And you could buy one bottle of this hand sanitizer for 40 krona, which is about £5. But if you wanted to buy two bottles, it would cost you 1,000 krona, so 25 times the price to buy two bottles of hand sanitizer. And that was a way they kept people from just buying what they needed. But then again, you still have another problem in your supermarket, this concept of social distancing. Now, by now, we have heard 6 feet and 2 meters so much, we're very familiar with it. But back in March, this was a new concept and people were not following the rules. So how do you get people to stand 6 feet or 2 meters apart? Well, a really creative solution is just putting tape on the ground. Simple, creative, and effective. And several supermarkets have implemented measures like this. And this is just 3 examples of how one industry has used creative thinking without much time or money and solved problems. And that's what we're going to talk about today, why creativity is such an important skill, particularly in times of change, and how it helps you in your career. So hello, everyone. My name is Beth Collier. Unfortunately, my webcam is not coming through today, but this is what I look like. on days when the hairdressers are open. And as David mentioned before, I started my career in communications, working in film and television in Los Angeles, and then built my career in financial services here in London. And what I love doing is helping people improve their communication, their creativity, and their leadership skills. And now I work with people one-on-one who want to become stronger public speakers and better writers, more effective leaders, and run workshops for teams that want to be more creative and innovative and effective. And that's what I really love doing, is helping people strengthen these skills, their communication and their creativity and leadership, because these are the skills that will bring joy to your life and the lives of others. And they really help you connect with people and advance your career. So today I want to talk about 3 things with you in regards to creativity. First of all, what creativity is, because there are a lot of misconceptions and myths around creativity. Secondly, why creativity is so important. And then finally, what you can do to strengthen your creativity. So I'm going to invite David and Holly to run the second poll question. And I want to ask you to rate your creativity. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how creative are you feeling right now? So 9 or 10, you feel very creative. 1, not so much. No right or wrong answer. I'm just curious how creative you're feeling.
That's a really great question, actually. Okay, good. So we're almost up to 80% already. So if our listeners can keep clicking away, and it's really interesting to see these come through. You know, when you talk about bell curves, incredible. Okay, 91%. We're up to 91%.
Okay.
Is that, I think we'll go with that. Thank you.
Fantastic. How'd we do? Here we go.
How do we do? Well, that bell curve is perfect, absolutely perfect bell curve. So the mid answer, 5 to 6, 37%, and either side of that, we've got a slight curve downwards. So 7 to 8, 28%, 3 to 4, 21%, and then either side of that, right the way to 6 and 7%. So a perfect bell curve. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. And thank you, David. That's really interesting to see where people rate themselves. So we've got, according to that, 65% of you are at that 6 or below. So that's interesting. I want to talk about what creativity is, because this might affect the way you identify and how creative you feel is how you actually look at what creativity is. And when I run these workshops for teams and I ask people, what do you think of when you hear that word creativity? The number one answer I get from people is art. They immediately think of art, design, colors, but creativity is about so much more than art. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who maybe aren't the strongest painters or writers or artists that feel like they aren't creative as a result of that. And it's just not true. And I define creativity as a process for coming up with an idea that is original and it's useful. So it's got to be something that is new and original, and it has to be useful. And so I would talk about Picasso. For whatever reason, he's the artist that people tend to mention to me the most. And people will say, Picasso was so creative. And I'd say, absolutely, he was. But picking up a paintbrush didn't make Picasso creative. It's what he did with that paintbrush that was original and deemed useful that made him so creative. So now we've talked about what creativity is. Why do you think it matters? And it's an interesting one because so many people do associate it with art. They think, well, I've got a serious business job. I don't need creativity. That's not my job. And we've got a whole industry of people identifying themselves as creative, which by nature kind of limits people who don't work in those types of jobs. But creativity is such an important skill, and it's so important for all of us. So in recent years, I researched this a lot, and there has been stuff that's come out from McKinsey and IBM and the World Economic Forum, all talking about why creativity is so important. And one of the reasons it's so important is that as we talk about how work is going to change, you may have heard that term future of work or future skills, creativity is something that the robots can't do. It's a human skill, and AI cannot do creativity. It's up to us as people. And LinkedIn found in their research that creativity was the single most important skill in the world for all business professionals today to master. So it doesn't matter what kind of job you do, where you live in the world, how senior or junior you are, everyone can benefit from creativity. And quite simply, the reason why it matters so much is because creativity is the skill that helps us innovate, and solve problems. And we've all got problems to solve, especially in the last year, as you can think of what's gone on and what will continue to go on in these times of change. We saw last year when the movie theaters suddenly closed, all the film companies had a new problem to solve. How do they get their product to people? And they experimented with video on demand and streaming options to get their products out to people and make money. We saw it with alcohol and perfume companies that suddenly pivoted their business and made hand sanitizer when there was a need. And even Dyson, known for their vacuum cleaners, they pivoted from their business to produce a prototype for Covent, which was a ventilator, and they did it in just 10 days. And we've seen people use creativity to serve their customers and keep people safe. Back to that concept of social distancing, again, how do you get people to keep that distance? Well, this is a scene from one park. This is how they did it. They made it absolutely clear what 6 feet or 2 meters looked like. And we've seen it in gyms. Again, how do you keep your customers safe but allow them to exercise? We know how important exercise is, particularly during all these lockdowns. How are you going to do that? And then you think about restaurants. How do you implement social distancing? And I want to share here 3 images of how different restaurants around the world implemented social distancing. So you have on the far left, that's Paris, where people were dining with teddy bears. The center image is from the Netherlands, where people were dining in private terraces. And the image on the far right, that's people dining under a plastic tarp in Chicago. And this is a good point about creativity. We can and should learn from others, and not just people in our industry. If you're facing a problem, it is very possible that someone has faced that problem before, or they're facing it now, and it's not limited to your industry. So if you own that restaurant where you're having people dine under a tarp, you might look around and think there could be a better way of doing this. So perhaps these examples are really showing you how creative thinking, doing something new and useful, has solved problems. But let me share another problem with you and why I'm here today and what your poll has reiterated to me. Most people don't think they are creative, but you are creative. It is a human trait, and it is one we are all born with. So no matter what you do or where you live, we all have the ability to come up with creative ideas and use our creativity to innovate and solve problems. So I'm curious, you already talked about how creative you're feeling, and I want to invite the third poll question here. And I want to know how many of you feel like you're living up to your creative potential. So this is just a yes or no question. Do you feel like you're living up to your creative potential?
Thank you. That's great. Okay, so we're up to 50% already, which is fantastic. Up to 70, so a few more seconds, everyone. And are we going to hit 90? Let's see if we can get 90%. Almost there. 85, and there we go. Thank you. That's great. Thank you. See what we've got. Wow, it's a big no. 86%. 86% no. That's a big number.
Wow. Thank you for that. This is an interesting one to ask, and not one that I always ask in groups, but I thought it would be interesting to see how people were feeling because, as I mentioned before, so many of us think we aren't creative, and as a result, we don't live up to our creative potential. And in fact, some more formal research on this has shown that about 1 in 4 of us feel like we're living up to our creative potential. So you've got 86%. Which shows huge improvement for you all to bring more creativity into your life because it is going to help you, not just in your job and your career, but personally. You can use creativity to solve all kinds of problems. And so you may be wondering, if creativity is important, and if you believe me that I say it's a human trait, why aren't more people creative? Well, I want to show you. So I'm going to have you on the honor system since I can't see you all, but I want to invite you to do a little experiment with me. And we are going to take a 15-second journey to the moon. So I want to invite you to stand up and close your eyes, and we are going to take a journey to the moon. So picture yourself, you're standing in this big open field. It's a beautiful day, blue skies. And I want to invite you to close your eyes and just picture yourself going to the moon. And we're going to go for 15 seconds. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1, blast off. Now come back to Earth. So how was that journey to the moon? Now, when I run this exercise in workshops, it's really interesting what people will say back to me, because some people will say, you know, I didn't get to the moon, or they might say I had a bumpy ride. Some people might picture themselves actually wearing a spacesuit. And sometimes people will physically change their posture. They'll reach their arms up to the sky like they're taking off. And it's really fun to see how people respond to this. But as an experiment, I wanted to see what kids would do. So I ran the same experiment with 100 children, ages 7 and 10. And I want you to think about your own journey to the moon. And let me share with you what the kids told me about theirs, the same 15-second journey to the moon. So this is what the 7-year-olds told me. There was a football stadium. I had a party on the moon. I played tag. I saw dinosaurs playing rugby. The moon was made of chocolate. Now fast forward just 3 years to age 10. Here's what the kids told me then. I planted a flag on the moon. I took a moon rock. There were craters. There were aliens. I wore a jetpack. Now look at the difference there, just 3 years. At 7 years old, you're picturing dinosaurs playing rugby. At 10, you're already talking about taking moon rocks and there being craters. You can see that kids have started to learn about space and the planets. Maybe they've seen a picture of Neil Armstrong. But what's really interesting about this is that children are just not limited in their thinking the way we are as adults. They are very good at a process called divergent thinking, which is just suspending judgment and coming up with all kinds of ideas. And as adults, we're very good at convergent thinking, which is the opposite. It is about using judgment and making decisions. And so we have a difficult time diverging into these crazy ideas, because we know that there aren't going to be dinosaurs playing rugby on the moon, because we've learned this. And unfortunately, the research shows the older we become, the more creativity we lose unless we work at it, because we become a product of our education and our work experience. And most of you would probably say that the rewards in work do not come by being the person who asks the most questions. We tend to get rewarded for knowing the answers. But I share this with you to show you the power of creative thinking. And you can always come back from those crazy ideas. And often it's much easier to put that idea that might seem wild or outlandish, put it out there, because you can always pull back. Now, what can we do to be more creative, though? Many of you have said you don't feel like you're living up to your potential. And here's the good news. Creativity is like any muscle. You can strengthen it with practice. And so I want to share with you my approach to creativity. And this is what I tell people it takes if you want to be creative. This is Beth Collier's Wizard of Oz approach to creative. So if you want to be creative, you've got to be like the Scarecrow and use your brain. You've got to be like the Tin Man and use your heart and have empathy. You've got to be like Dorothy and be curious and kind. And you've got to be like the lion and have courage. And this point on courage is really important, because creativity is hard. And it's hard because it requires you to be vulnerable. It's all about coming up with new ideas and putting them out there for others to critique. And the truth is, we as humans don't like change very much, and we cling to the status quo. But creative ideas, by definition, are different. And as a result, they often get rejected. And one of the things I found so interesting in my research is finding out that historically, humans have been lousy at recognizing creative ideas. So creative ideas that are in our life, the idea of putting wheels on a suitcase, that was rejected. It took decades to get it to market because people said it was a crazy idea. Post-it notes took 8 years to get to market. And even then, 3M didn't think they would be commercially successful. And the idea of Airbnb, imagine pitching that idea, an accommodation business that doesn't own any rooms. These ideas were all rejected. That doesn't mean they weren't creative. So it takes courage to put your ideas out there, to experiment, and possibly fail. And just like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, you might get lost, you might be scared, but you have to keep going. So I want to leave you with 3 points about how to strengthen your creativity, because it is such a valuable skill for all of us. And the first tip is to be curious. Ask questions, try new things. Be courageous. Know that creative ideas get rejected all the time. And that's why it's so important, my third point, to be persistent, because that's what you have to do if you truly want to be creative. Now, if you are curious to learn more, I would invite you to connect or follow me on LinkedIn. I write a lot about creativity as well as communication and leadership on there, and happy to share that with you. Also, I run workshops like this for teams, ranging from an hour to 2 hours to a full day. And I've now got a virtual 6-week program that I'm doing. You can find out more information of that. It's all about creativity as an important commercial business skill. And you can find information at beth-collier.com/CFB. I've also added some materials to that site, some more resources on creativity to help you strengthen your creativity. And you do have a handout. If you look on the control panel, you can see the handout that has these details, so you can find out more about creativity. And I want to leave you with one final anecdote here about creativity. So this man was known for being particularly creative, and if you don't recognize him yet, that might help. This is Walt Disney. And years after Walt Disney died, Disney employees attempted to keep his spirit alive by constantly asking, what would Walt do? And maybe they thought if they asked that question, they would come up with something original that would remain true to Walt's pioneering spirit. But in fact, this kind of thinking only accomplished the opposite. It looked backward, not forward, and it tethered Disney to the status quo. And a pervasive fear of change took root. Now, when Steve Jobs was at Apple, he was aware of this story, and he used to repeat to people at Apple, adding it that when he was gone, he never wanted people to ask, what would Steve do? And that's because no one, not Walt Disney, not Steve Jobs, or anyone else, ever achieved creative success by simply clinging to what used to work. Thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you, Beth. That was really cool, really cool. And I love the subject. It's so important, and the number of discussions, debates, arguments that I've had over many years about the need for creativity in IT service management is you know, I've lost count. I've lost count. It's a brilliant subject, and that if anybody wants to have a little look at that World Economic Forum data, the research on skills, declining skills and skills that are going up. I think it was published probably the end of 2019, if I remember rightly. It's really, really interesting reading. So I think we could have talked about this all day, just on its own, I think, Beth, because I love the subject and I've studied it quite closely.
Oh, great.
Thank you very much indeed. We haven't got a lot of time for a question, unfortunately, and I don't know if you're going to be staying through today, Beth, or just joining us intermittently. We may have opportunities at some point to pause one of those. So we're going to move on. So thank you very much indeed, Beth. That was great. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, so next we're going to welcome Sarah Wilkes. And Sarah is Head of Service Strategic Accounts at SCC. Sarah is an award-winning IT